Hello everyone and welcome to Hockey Up. So today we're doing a team preview and we're looking at our first Canadian team of this team preview. Now I know that I did off-season reviews for all 7 Canadian teams and that it is kind of similar to this format, but I am still going to do the Canadian teams for this team previews because I do talk about more of their actual lineup than I do simply just the moves they made. So we are going to start with the Toronto Maple Leafs and we're going to start with what they added this offseason. Toronto really did add a lot this offseason. They had a very big free agency, signing a lot of guys for honestly reasonable contracts, which is not exactly something Toronto's known for, but the whole COVID landscape has probably helped them out with that. Their big acquisition, TJ Brodie, I really like this signing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He fits a perfect need for Toronto. He is a left-hand defenseman, but he does play the right side, and he's more of a defensive defenseman. Brodie does make the odd mistake, but when he plays so many minutes, that's bound to happen. Brodie was a minute muncher in Calgary, and I think the Calgary Flames are really going to miss him. Calgary did sign Chris Tanev, which kind of offsets that, but we'll talk about that in a different video. This is about Toronto. So I really like that Brodie signing for them. I think Toronto fans are really going to be enamored with Brodie's play. He is a very underrated defenseman, and I think probably slots in their top pairing beside Morgan Rielly. They also signed Wayne Simmonds to try and get some grit and physicality, and once again, for a 1-year, $1 million contract, you really can't go wrong with that. Simmonds is probably going to play a fourth-line role for them, and I think that's probably where he's best suited at this point in his career. Simmonds can still score 10 to 15 goals, but provide you with that intimidation, that fighting and everything, that grit that Toronto's really lacked outside of a guy like Kyle Clifford, or in the past Matt Martin. So Simmonds, I think everybody could see it coming that he was going to Toronto because it was kind of the perfect fit for both player and team. They also signed Jimmy Vesey, which Vesey is a solid third-line two-way winger. There was a lot of hype about Vesey when he was coming into his NHL career, and he definitely hasn't lived up to that hype. Toronto did get him on a league minimum contract for just 1 year, and I think that's a really good contract. Vesey, although he hasn't lived up to that hype, is still a solid bottom six player and really helps round out that bottom six for Toronto. He should be able to maybe even play on the penalty kill and provide Toronto with some good defensive zone starts, and could actually be a bit of a Swiss Army knife for them. They also signed Zach Bogosian to a 1-year, $1 million deal. I think this is another signing that was kind of made for that grit and intimidation purposes, but Bogosian is a solid enough defensive defenseman. We saw that in Tampa Bay, playing alongside Victor Hedman. He was actually able to hold his own and did help out with Tampa Bay's run to the Stanley Cup. So Bogosian, although he was brutal in Buffalo, kind of turned it around a bit in Tampa Bay, and I can't see any reason why he shouldn't have a decent year in Toronto, playing on that bottom pairing, or maybe even being a healthy scratch sometimes. But when they need somebody to provide that grit and that physicality, if they're going up against a team like Boston, Bogosian will definitely be a useful asset for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They also signed Joe Thornton, which to me, I think a lot more of this move is being made than it should. Thornton is really not in his prime anymore, to say the least. He's a very slow skater, and his game has just kind of gotten ugly at this point. He takes a lot of slashes and stupid penalties, to be honest, and I do think that this is probably Joe Thornton's last year in the NHL. Joe Thornton in his prime was an amazing player, and in my opinion is a first ballot Hall of Famer, and is one of the greatest centermen of all time. I do really like Jumbo Joe, but at this point, I don't know if Toronto Maple Leafs were the best fit for him, since Toronto already had Jason Spezza, and to me, I don't get why they re-signed Spezza if they knew they were going to go out and get Thornton. I think that both of those guys kind of fill the same role, and I know some league executives kind of feel the same thing, that the Joe Thornton thing really didn't make that much sense for Toronto. Brian Burke did voice some of his complaints about that signing, but I don't think the signing is going to damn Toronto. I just think that Toronto fans should really lower their expectations when it comes to what Thornton is going to provide. Toronto got Joey Anderson for Andreas Johnsson from New Jersey. So I think Joey Anderson has a little bit of potential as maybe a middle six forward. They did sign him to a 3-year contract extension where he's getting paid under $1 million, and for what Anderson provides, I think that's very good. To me, Anderson should probably play on that third line there. I think he does have a bit of potential, and New Jersey had to give him up in order to get Johnsson, and I think that's honestly fair value. Obviously, I think Johnsson is a step ahead to Anderson at this point, but we'll get into that later. But Anderson is another solid pickup for Toronto. They got a lot of smart, under-the-radar acquisitions or signings, and their overall depth looks a lot better. They also signed Travis Boyd. That's another good depth signing. They signed Aaron Dell as the third-string goaltender to really solidify their goaltending if one of Anderson or Campbell gets hurt. They even signed Mikko Lehtinen from the KHL, and Lehtinen has been one of the best defensemen in the KHL the last couple of years now, so he's not a guy that gets talked about a lot, but he could come in and actually have a bit of an impact for Toronto and help shore up that defensive depth. maybe even push for a top 4 role. I don't really know what to make of Letnan, but he does have a lot of potential, and he was very good in the KHL. It's just a matter of how well his game is going to transition over to the NHL. But overall, like obviously this part of the video took a while to talk about and everything, because Toronto added a lot of players. Not necessarily a lot of stars, but really good astute signings and trades, and a few of these I really like, especially the Brody signing. That being said, Toronto also did lose a few key pieces. They had to trade away Kasperi Kapanen for cap reasons. They did get a good return for him, definitely, and Rodin Amirov is a very good prospect they got in return for that draft pick. So yeah, they did lose Kapanen, and they did lose Johnson, which I don't think Johnson is a big loss. He had that one really good year, and then they kind of gave him a bit of a hefty contract. Not that it's a bad contract, but just when a team like Toronto is so cap-strapped, that's a contract they definitely could have afforded to move. They also let Tyson Barrie walk in free agency, which I think everybody could see coming from a mile away. It just wasn't a good fit in Toronto for the player or the team, and under no circumstances do I think Toronto was thinking of bringing him back. And same goes for Cody Ceci. Ceci was brutal his first year with Toronto, and in general has been brutal pretty much his entire career, aside from a few good seasons with Ottawa. So losing Barrie and Ceci should actually be an addition by subtraction. Yeah, those guys weren't necessarily providing a lot for Toronto. They did let Kyle Clifford walk as well. He ended up signing with the St. Louis Blues, and I do think Toronto probably got an upgrade on Clifford when it comes to Wayne Simmons. Simmons kind of replaces that role that Clifford provided, and I think Simmons is a better player. Clifford, it did make sense when they traded for him, add that grit and everything, but he just didn't seem to bring that same level of play he had in LA to Toronto, so I don't think that is a big loss for Toronto either. But moving on to Toronto's top 6, Toronto is one of the best top 6s in the entire NHL. The big four in Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Tavares is a great core, and all those guys are very dynamic offensively. To me, Auston Matthews is a franchise-level center. His goal-scoring ability is second to, I think, only Alex Ovechkin at this point. I do think that Matthews definitely has a rocket Richard in the coming years, and overall he's a fantastic player. John Tavares, I think, is that contract's starting to look a bit heavy at this point, but Tavares is still a premier player, a first-line center, and although he had a bit of a down year this past year, I still think he can bounce back and be a lot better. Part of the reason why he had a down year was that he was struggling with injuries, and Marner was moved off his line. And speaking of Mitch Marner, I think Mitch Marner is fantastic. A lot of Toronto fans have kind of soured on him due to that whole contract dispute things. But overall, I mean, it's not like Marner's contract is terrible. I do think Marner is one of the best wingers in the NHL, and arguably one of the best playmaking wingers or players in the entire league. Marner's passing ability is second to none on the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we've seen that whoever they put him with, their goal totals seem to go up. If he's playing with Matthews, Matthews looks like a 50-goal scorer. If he's playing with Tavares, Tavares looks like a 50-goal scorer. Marner has such a positive impact on whoever he plays with and the lineup in general. Marner is also good in his own zone, and I think Marner is one of the best players in the Toronto Maple Leafs, and has been their best player for the last couple of years. I do think that Matthews really coming into his own is going to change that now. I do think Matthews is the big piece there, but Marner is definitely a very good winger to have alongside a guy like Matthews. Nylander had himself a very good year as well after having a very down year in 2018-2019. Nylander really looked good. He was close to point per game, and actually surprisingly had a little bit of grit to his game. Not necessarily physicality, but a lot of his goals were scored right out front of the net by deflections or getting rebounds, and overall he looked like a lot better of a player. There's also Zach Hyman, which I think Zach Hyman is one of the most underrated players in the NHL. He always scores 20 goals and doesn't really get a lot of credit for it because, you know, playing behind guys like Matthews, Marner, and Nylander, you're not going to get that level of credit, but I think Hyman is a solid enough second-line forward and has a good two-way game. And then I guess the last forward I would throw in there would be Alexander Kerfoot. I could see them moving him to the left wing and playing him alongside a guy like Tavares since, you know, they did add a center in Joe Thornton that could maybe play that third line. Kerfoot is a solid player, not necessarily a star or anything, but I do think is serviceable enough to play on that second line. So overall, Toronto's top 6 is really, really good. I think Toronto's top 4 has improved greatly with the Brody addition as well. Morgan Rielly is still the top pairing guy there, but then having Brody alongside him and then maybe Muzzin and Dermott on that second pairing actually makes for a decent top 4. It's just a matter of whether or not they're actually going to play like it. But on paper, their top 4 is really good. As I said, I really like the Brody acquisition, and Morgan Riley has been everything for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's a real heart and soul guy, and in my opinion should have been their captain actually. I really like Morgan Riley's game, and although he does make some defensive miscues, he's a very solid two-way defender that offensively had a bit of a down year this past year, but I do think can bounce back to that 60-point form. Toronto is a solid goaltending tandem as well, which is why it doesn't make a lot of sense to me why there's so many, articles about, oh, is Toronto's goaltending a weakness or everything. Jack Campbell is a good backup, not necessarily one of the best backups in the league, but a solid enough backup that he can give them 20 good starts. And then Frederik Andersen, I still think is one of the better starting goaltenders in the NHL. I understand that he had a down year, but consistently he's been a very good goaltender and one of the best in the league statistically. I really like Anderson's game. I get that he's not a great playoff goalie, but I think a part of that is the team in front of him falling apart. So Anderson, although I do think he probably leaves after this season because he's probably going to demand a bit of money and not necessarily money that Toronto has to spend, I do think Anderson is probably going to have one more good year in Toronto, and then Toronto is going to have to reevaluate their goaltending after that. Now, Toronto's best players is basically all of the players that I talked about in their top six. Aside from Morgan Riley, he's definitely a guy I would have in their best players. But then that big four of Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Tavares, that is one of the best cores in the NHL. Granted, I don't know if that's a core that's necessarily built to win in the playoffs, as we've seen, but regular season, you couldn't ask for a more dynamic, kind of offensive core there. None of these guys really stick out as, very good defensive players or anything, but offensively, it makes a lot of sense why Toronto is always one of the top offensive teams in the NHL. Matthews is fantastic. I mean, they're all fantastic. But moving into players I want to talk about, I want to talk about Nicholas Robertson. Now, I do think Robertson gets overhyped a lot of times by Toronto media because he's so young, and, Nick Robertson is only 18 and everything. He turned 19 recently, so that meme has kind of died down. But I do think Robertson has some serious potential as a top six forward. I don't necessarily know if he's going to see that potential this upcoming season, though. Despite the fact that he did play for them in the play-in round, I don't know if he necessarily cracks their lineup this upcoming season. I could see Robertson ending up playing in the AHL, developing his game down there, and I think that might actually be what's best for Robertson. I don't know if he's exactly NHL ready yet. I mean, he was just picked a couple of years ago and was a second-round pick, so it's not like he was really expected to come in this early. It does say a lot about his level of play and that he should end up being a very good player at the NHL level, but I don't know if his time is here just yet. And I want to talk about Zach Hyman again. Now, I already talked about how I think Hyman is one of the more underrated wingers in the NHL, and he can score 20 goals and has a very solid two-way game. But I want to talk about some of Hyman's comments about, maybe taking a discount to stay in Toronto. I do believe Hyman only has 1 year left on his contract, and I don't think Hyman is a player that the Toronto Maple Leafs would want to lose. Hyman is a solid top six winger, and if he's able to take a pay discount, I think that some of the other guys in that locker room should look to that and say, hey, maybe we should have done that. Because I don't think that any of their big guys took any form of hometown discount. But if Hyman's going to do that, I think it speaks to how well his character is and how much he does truly love and want to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I can see why he's a bit of a fan favorite for reasons like that. And I want to talk about William Nylander. Now, everybody talks about how William Nylander is, a big trade candidate for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I think that he's a player Toronto should actually hold on to. Out of the big four, he's probably on the most reasonable contract of them all, which sounds weird to say because it looked like his contract was a massive overpayment at first. But after the year he just had, he's worth every penny of that. He was near point per game and looked like a very good goal scorer from basically any spot on the ice. He could score in close, from afar, he's got a very nice shot, good hands, and is a very fast winger. So Nylander really took a step forward in his overall game and should only continue to progress since he's still only so young. So that contract isn't looking too bad right now. And in general, I don't think that like any of the contracts there's looking terrible. It's the fact that all of them are making a lot of money. Like, it's not like Matthews got his money, but Marner was able to take a discount, so it all balances out. No, all of them got market value or above, actually. And when you're dealing with young players and homegrown talent, you do kind of want them to take a little bit of a discount compared to as if they were on the free agent market. And I think signing John Tavares is probably the result of that, since he got that much money. Matthews said, oh, well, I want that much money, and then Marner and everything. But Nylander's contract, for now at least, is looking quite good. Now, I think that Toronto is a contender. They have had their playoff struggles the last 4 years, and while I don't necessarily know if they're going to go on a playoff run, I definitely think that they do still make the playoffs. I don't know if I see them making it past the first round. It is going to depend on who they match up against, but I can say with confidence that I think Toronto is going to make the playoffs, especially if they are in the Canadian division. To me, Toronto is the best Canadian team on paper, so it makes sense that they will probably finish atop of the Canadian division. I don't think that Toronto is a true cup contender yet is the thing. I'm not ready to say that they're there yet. I would need to see them win a round or two before I could say that. They have had their playoff struggles. They do need to exercise those playoff demons, and before they do that, I can't say that they're a cup favorite, but I can say that they're definitely a playoff team and a contender. But that does it for today's video. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later. Bye for now.